Hello, everyone, and welcome to this RSNO Chatinée, the third one in the series. We will just let the clock run a little bit while our attendees clock in here. With me, I've got four of my colleagues from the RSNO, the four principals who have been featured in the RSNO Principals Month. And they have recorded a lot of videos. They've recorded concerts and short interviews and long interviews, which we'll be hearing a little bit more about later. First of all, to explain to you here on Zoom, you can see us, but we can't see you. So feel free to do anything that you want while you listen to this. But I would say that in the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A function. And if you have any questions that you want to ask anyone on the panel, feel free to put them in there at any point. We've had a few questions sent in, which we'll get to answering towards the end here. But while we go, some of the principals here might find a minute to answer by text in the Q&A as well. So, yes, the RSNO Principals Month. It is a sort of a concept that came up through lockdown, I guess, when we finally had time to kind of feature a little bit more our sort of in-house talent. It's always been a struggle to find time in the schedule to create this kind of material. We've dreamt of it in the orchestra to do that for a long time, but we haven't had time until now. Isn't that correct, everyone? Yeah, I wonder if one of you could sort of take charge here and tell us a little bit about, you know, the backgrounds, why, for example, they chose these pieces and why the interviews and the beginner's guides. Would one of you like to dive in?
I don't mind speaking.
Go for it.
So when we were going through lockdown to start off with, we thought, well, how are we going to keep the orchestra kind of relevant when we come out the other side? So yes, we enjoy doing all our big concerts and all this sort of stuff, but we thought, well, we never really we do sort of education projects throughout the year where we go and visit schools, and schools come into the RSNO Centre, and normally they come and watch a concert, and normally we would go to them and do a little workshop. So this sort of fell nicely into going, well, we can't do that at the moment, so we're going to start off with a set of 4 videos and go, right, well, we'll go straight from beginner level. So what we do in the school normally is we go, okay, well, I go, hello, this is a trumpet and these are the valves and this is the bell and you blow a raspberry and this is how it works. And it was quite a nice way to tie it in with a project that Alistair, our chief executive, had right when he started at the orchestra, which was to have like a really broad spectrum of education videos. So the set of 3 things that we've done, so the beginner's guide and the chat before the concerto, and then the actual concerto, it starts off with the beginner's guide with, you know, it doesn't matter how old you are, if you haven't started, you can learn how to play whatever. And then the chat was designed so that if you were, say, 17 and looking to go to music college and you think, oh, I need to play the Haydn trumpet concerto, how do I do that? Then there's a bit of information about that. Or if you just want to know more about the music side of it and less about the nuts and bolts, then there's bits about that. And then you actually hear the culmination of the beginner's guide and the bits of advice, and then you present the concerto and go, this is hopefully what it should be like, roughly.
That's
so
brilliant.
I think that was kind of the idea.
Good, yeah. So it's really a sort of a long-term resource. It's you know, first of all, we have the Principals Month, but this is not something that's going to be sort of hidden away afterwards. It's going to be a long-term resource for us in the orchestra. And as far as I gather, it's also the plan to spread it out to all the other instruments, but that will take a while to do. So we're very happy to have the first ones of these things, our intrepid first explorers here. And before we really get into it though, there's one thing I forgot to do. I thought we should ask the attendees here, the people listening, to see if any of them play any of the instruments that our principals play here. So if our administrator behind the scene here could throw up a poll for everyone to answer. Should be coming up on your screen. You can pick a choice. I've played all of them, but I don't know if it counts. So just choose your answer. You can choose multiple if you want as well.
So I'm just going to dive in here, Dávur. We can't vote for ourselves then.
No, that's fine. We know what you play already, Dave, so it's fine.
I've never heard you play the oboe though, Dávur. So
anytime.
I have heard him play the trumpet, so
it's magical. I always carry a trumpet mouthpiece in my bag just in case Chris is not feeling so well. So if everyone can get to answering that question, we should see a result on our screen very soon. And there we go. Wow, right. So the flute wins, but quite a few people that haven't played. This is interesting. Okay, this is good for us to know as well for our chat as we go on here. The other thing to mention about Principals Month is that it's dedicated to the RSNO chair sponsors. And these are people that are very important to us, people who have enabled quite a lot of the activity of the RSNO through the ages. And all of us here on screen have a chair sponsor. I wonder if maybe Katherine would say something about that, since you mentioned that in the interview that you did as well.
Yeah. Hi everybody. Yeah, I'm really lucky. I've got such amazing chair sponsors, Anne and David Smith, and they have sponsored my chair for a while now, and they also sponsor Kennedy, my husband's chair as well. So it's a big family. I think that's the thing for me, actually. I have such a great relationship with them, as does Kennedy, that it does feel like kind of RSNO family, and for me it makes a huge difference having them as my sponsors and having them in the audience when I play. I know that they are sort of really proud of what I do, and that makes me want to do better for them, you know, and it's just a great kind of contact, and also getting feedback from them about different things that I do and the RSNO do is really, it's really great. It's like an open dialogue all the time with sort of two really important members of the audience. So that in itself is, I think, is really lovely. And obviously the support they give us and the organization, but also us individually, is really invaluable.
It's fair to say that the chair sponsors, they are all very special in their own way. They can do more things than just come to concerts. That's what I found so cool about them. Some of them have been involved for the orchestra with the orchestra for a very long time, and the huge array of work that they have sponsored, like in the background, which you probably don't see. For example, me and Adrian, we have the same chair sponsor, Mr. Hedley Wright, who has been involved with the orchestra since probably the 50s, something like that. And he doesn't only sponsor, he sponsors 5 chairs in the orchestra, and he sponsors concert series. But more than that, he also sponsors a lot of the education activities that happen behind, and not only within the orchestra. He also does like out with the RSNO, things like that. And David, you have a chair sponsor as well, right?
Yes. James and Morag Anderson are my chair sponsors, and I think one of the things, certainly when I joined the orchestra, not long after they came to sponsor my chair, is kind of like a badge of honor for us as well as musicians. You always feel very proud when you've got your first chair sponsor and they sponsor your chair, and it is a special relationship, and it is kind of it kind of makes you feel good, because obviously that's like you're representing someone who's also representing you, and it's Katherine said the right thing, you know, is part of the family. That kind of, that's what I love about the RSNO. It's far greater than just the orchestra. It's a big family that extends right into the community in various ways, and this obviously one of them. You know, it's a great way.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. I know that me and Adrian, we're looking at the same spot in the Usher Hall every time we play there, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I just wanted to add that there's something very tangible about the support of, you know, if there's someone there who you know is supporting you and they're in the concert hall when you're performing. In terms of Hedley, you know, he used to play the oboe, so we've had some fantastic chats about the sort of the pros and cons of the instrument and the sort of ups and downs that come with it. And it's just really nice to have someone there who knows exactly what you're going through when you're performing on stage. In fact, if he's listening right now, he's probably one of the 4% of people who've played the oboe.
I'll have you know that he's actually picked up the trombone now as well. So, but he hasn't called me. He hasn't called me for a lesson yet. So it'll come. And Chris, how about you? You have is it a new chair sponsor you have, or?
Yeah, so Chris came on board. Time has been a very relative construct for the last year and a bit, but it seems quite recent. But it must have been about 18 months ago now that Chris came on board, and she sponsors myself and also Paul Filbert on the timpani chair. We had planned to meet kind of this time last year, which kind of got thrown out the window a little bit with everything that's happened. But we've been in contact a little bit over the last few months. And I think it's the thing, like I said this in my interview, it's the fact that, I don't know about the others, but when we're in our normal kind of routine of things and you're doing concerts and, you're doing education workshops and you've got your own little bits to do, teaching on the side, you can feel a little bit like you're just kind of repeating yourself. But when you have a chair sponsor, it sort of kicks in and you go, oh, there's people that really kind of care an awful lot about this. Obviously we all care about what we do, but sometimes I find I'm kind of get a bit kind of blinkered about things, and then someone goes, oh, someone sat there and listened to you play, and they liked it enough to put their name to that chair. It's a really nice feeling, and it makes you kind of sit up and go, there are people that care really deeply about the work that we're doing. It's really, really nice.
Great. I was just to add, my chair sponsors, David and Anna, are so brilliant. They send me reviews if anyone's written anything nice, which means I don't have to read them. So they'll send them on to me. They were like, did you see this one? So it's great. Problem is, if I don't hear from them for a long time, it's like, no one is liking my work recently. No, I do hear from them.
That's fantastic to hear. Like, I didn't know that, Katherine. Do they ever say anything about the trombones? I wonder.
Oh yeah, no, I just don't get sent those ones.
Okay. So yeah, and in the greater context, I think chair sponsors have the whole concept of private people sponsoring this kind of art has always been necessary. It's something that we've always depended on, and it's something that I want to show a little bit more as we go through this, like how big sort of a symbiotic, huge organization the RSNO is, how much goes on behind the music that happens on the stage. Because the principals that you have in front of you here, they don't just do practice and playing on stage. So let's go through and speak to all of them a little bit. And I'll give each one of them a little bit of an introduction. I'm going to try and see if I can get them to blush. I think I can get Chris. I don't know about the other ones. So let's start with Adrian. Adrian is a very, very interesting friend. He does nothing by halves. He's one of these annoying people that always ends what he starts. So, for example, here during lockdown, I did some video editing, and I thought it was kind of cool. And Adrian phoned me, and he said, "Oh, can you please help me? How did you do it and all that?" And I told him how, and he asked pretty basic questions about like, how do you save a file and all that. So I thought, I was getting a little bit sort of nervous about his video. But when I then saw the video, his video was like 100 times better than mine. He had made a stop motion Lego music video of was it Mozart Oboe Concerto or no, Elgar Serenade?
No, it was Elgar. Yeah, piece that Elgar wrote at the end of his life. Yeah. For Oboe.
For Oboe, yeah. And that's the thing about Adrian. So if he gets into something, he just doesn't stop until he reaches the end. For example, he started running in January 2020 and didn't stop until December, after which he'd run 2,200 kilometers in aid of 3 different charities, music charities. I guess at some point in his life, he discovered that he liked wine. So I know for a fact that in his house, he has one of every wine in the world. He's got a huge wine cellar, which looks a bit like a sort of a James Bond's villain lair, sort of underneath his living room. It's quite incredible. You should all see. I'd love to see some. It'd be cool if you could show us a picture, or you could show us. Are you in the living room right now?
Yeah. As you've already explained, I'm not great at technology. Yeah. Maybe when someone else is talking,
let's do that. We can see if we can get that up afterwards. Adrian, is it important? Is that part of how you became a musician? That you have this sort of, is it, shall we call it like, is it an attention to detail? Is it a sort of an endless curiosity into every subject in the world that leads you right to the end of everything? Is that part of who you are as a musician?
You are embarrassing me now. It's a good question. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things about music is that it's an art form. There's no right, there's no wrong. So we're constantly, you know, performing arts is a journey that you never perfect. It's impossible to perfect, and it's a journey that you go throughout your whole life, sort of searching, I guess, for what you think its values are. I think, yeah, it's true to say that if I get into something, I really sort of take that as far as possible. Whether that's something that is great for performing music or not, I don't know. I'll leave that to your judgment. But yeah, I came to music quite late. So up until about the age of 17, 18, I really hadn't decided what I was going to do. So I guess I was one of these people growing up that always liked to sort of keep their toe in a lot of different swimming pools, if you like. So I did maths and music as a joint degree, and I was also very interested in art as well. So I sort of felt like I could have gone in several directions, but I think in the end the music bug bit me strong enough to make me realize that there wasn't really any other way I could possibly go and satisfy myself. So yeah.
Well, that's fascinating. I like that. It's a thing that I always wonder about, how people become musicians nowadays, that people get directed in one way too soon, and you don't get to see what goes on around. So somehow some educations that are a little bit more like maths and music, that sounds, I wish I could go and do that degree.
Well, I think the thing that struck me about those particular subjects were that in a way, because people often talk about maths and music being linked, I actually think that they're the complete opposite in that maths as a science is very exact. It's very, you know, there is a black and white way and you're following rules. Whereas I think music, it sort of gave me the opposite. It sort of gave me a way to express myself much more easily. So I sort of felt like doing the two subjects together actually sort of gave me a more well-rounded feeling of living in a way.
That's interesting, because I see them too as sort of, you know, connected at points. There's definitely things, but you have to know when they're not connected. Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, my other interests, so I can relate the wine. I mean, you know, we've probably all got a little bit of interest in wine, but I think the interest for me is that actually the making of wine is an art form in itself, and the way that you're working with nature, and you know, and geology and geography, etc. That really fascinates me. So it's not just about drinking the wine; it's actually sort of an atlas and a science in there too. You know, so I've spent a lot of time visiting places around the world that make wine, and there's something quite nice about the way that we describe music and the way that we describe wine, which you can actually relate as well. You know, when we're talking about colors and textures and perfume, even, you know. Now that is a PhD that I want to go down. So if anyone would like to sponsor me on that one, I do. Yeah.
No, that's interesting. How you describe something that is extremely intangible. It's like talking about music is like, yeah, dancing about physics, and but we have to.
I mean, in the way that no musical performance is ever the same as another one. You know, no two bottles of wine are exactly the same, even if they've got the same label on it, you know. So.
I'll also add that Adrian came around to my house once, and he said he was going to bring some old wine with him. And when he said old, I thought, what, 5-year-old, 6-year-old red or something like that. But he actually bought a port from 1780 something. So I wanted to ask, do you happen in your preparation for the Mozart performance, like, do you have any port lying around that is from around Mozart's time?
Yeah, no, I think you're, I think it might have been a 19th century bottle, but no, I've got a bottle of wine from Beethoven's death year, 1827, which we'll have to find a special occasion to open that, obviously.
I look forward to that.
Maybe in 6 years' time, it'll be 200 years old, won't it? So.
Sounds good. We'll all meet here again.
Yeah. Exactly.
So thank you very much, Adrian.
Sorry.
Next to you, you have sitting Katherine in the orchestra. Now, Katherine, I have to say, it's been fascinating for me to see all, see my own orchestra from the front through lockdown. And I've noticed something about you that maybe everyone else knows that watches all the time, and that we have something in common. And I wonder if you can answer this. So I'm gonna guess that you do the same thing as me. So when I practice in a room, I cannot stand in front of the music stand. I have to walk around. I have to move all the time to like follow the breathing and all that. It's absolutely, just can't stand still. I bet you do the same thing.
Yeah, I'm a mover. I think everybody that watches me play probably knows that I'm not very good at sitting still, and not very good at standing still either when I play standing up. But I think for me, that music making has always been such a sort of real physical thing for me, and also I've always been kind of interested in the theatre and acting and things like that. So I think that probably influences quite a lot of the style that I perform in, and it's interesting. I sort of talking about music and maths, and I mean maths is like my idea of some sort of nightmare, but music and theatre for me is the sort of the thing that I've always done kind of hand in hand. I mean, obviously I don't do any acting anymore, but as a child I grew up wanting to be an actress. That's kind of what I wanted to do. And then I kind of, somebody put a flute in my hands and sort of thought, this is quite good. I can actually tell stories through this instrument. So that, I think that sort of has had a big impact on the way that I sort of present performances, and certainly on the way that I teach as well. I think I put a heavy emphasis on that communication and storytelling element of music making, and also the way that you can communicate not only with your audience that way, but also with your colleagues around you. And, it's with Adrian, I know that when we sort of play, and Dave as well, somewhat, although I can't see him in quite the same way, that sort of physical connection is really important. And especially at the moment, because we're playing so spread out, we're passing lines around, kind of sweeping it across the 2 meter gap. But I think that is a lovely way of making music, and I think as an audience member, I know that I love to see that kind of physicality as well, because for me it kind of brings the music alive. So
yeah, it's interesting because I think about them much in the same ways, but of course maybe you can't see it from back where I am, and with my instrument it's more of a sort of a health and safety hazard if I move too much, so I have to stay pointing straight forward. But certainly when I teach when I teach myself a piece or anyone else, I want to get I want to see shapes behind the music. There's sort of that a note moves somewhere, and it maybe sounds kind of cheesy, but if you can't connect it to an actual movement in life, like into a movement, not instrument, then you're not doing it right, I feel. And the thing is, moving for me makes me relax. If I go too stiff, I feel myself like I'm holding myself exactly where I am. But whereas when you're moving, you're engaging lots of muscles subconsciously, and it becomes a real sort of dance. And I was sure that you do the same in the practice room. So you move as much in the practice room as you do when you play.
Oh yeah, probably. And I mean, this isn't a vanity thing, although my husband might disagree, but I have a huge mirror in my practice music room. Like the whole wall is a mirror, one wall. And that's really important to me, because I can then check things, because like you say, physicality and what we do physically is so important for us all as musicians on a technical level, especially for wind players, because of the breathing and having kind of, not attention in the wrong places and things. So having a mirror there to kind of be my teacher and sort of critique me and check that in doing something I'm not triggering anything else is really important. So often students sort of say to me, what's the best thing I could buy when I take up an instrument? And I always say a mirror, and then the instrument, but get the mirror first, because you need that constant reminder of what we're doing, I think.
Well, that's a top tip for our audience, who have none of them have taken up any woodwind instruments yet, so maybe they should try. Katherine, there's something else about you as well, which you of course you're an important musician in the orchestra, but you have also served a role behind the scenes for a long time, which is in the artistic committee.
Yeah.
And I even wondered if people know that such a thing exists. So could you explain a little bit about what the artistic committee does and how long you've been in it?
Yeah, so the artistic committee is sort of I think there's about 7 musicians that represent all the sections of the orchestra, not all the sections, but strings, wind, brass, that sit with members of the management, and we have kind of regular meetings discussing basically the artistic sort of plan of the orchestra, and that involves what we're playing, conductors that are coming in, soloists that are coming in, conditions of artistic conditions of work, how it affects us and things like that. And I've been in the orchestra for 18 years, and I've been on the artistic committee for 17 years, I think. so if you haven't enjoyed anything we've played for the last 17 years, then that's my fault. No, it's not. I mean, it's very, obviously we're not kind of deciding what we play, but we are advising, I suppose advising and just discussing, and it's really interesting. I mean, that's the side of the orchestra that I feel I can help with most, because I've sort of been lucky enough to work in a lot of other places, so I've sort of met other conductors and soloists and things, so often bringing recommendations is quite a useful thing, and it's for all of us in the orchestra. If we work with a conductor somewhere that hasn't been to the RSNO, we bring it back and say, we need to work with this gentleman or lady. So it's great to have that sort of input, and that comes through us as members of the committee from the whole orchestra, really. But it's really interesting. I mean, we've been involved recently quite heavily with the appointment of the new assistant conductor, who's just been announced, Kellen Gray. So we had quite a lot of input in that process. So it's great. It's really fascinating, and hopefully it's a useful tool for the management to have the players kind of that sort of bridge between the orchestra and the management in that level. And
it's something that the orchestras maybe don't have to the same degree that we have in the RSNO, and is one reason that I like working here.
Yeah, speaking to players that have had other positions in other orchestras, which I haven't, I've only ever worked here, but they say that it is a very kind of open dialogue in the RSNO across the departments, which I think is just really healthy, and it's lovely that the players are consulted and feel like what we say is of some use occasionally.
Definitely. Cool. Well, that's very interesting to hear from the artistic committee angle as well. Our time is running out quickly. I need to hurry up through everyone. I'm going to move on to David. Thank you, Katherine. David, you must be a very patient man, because I remember when I joined the orchestra, how many questions I had to you about reeds. So I would often come and ask you like 10 minutes before rehearsal started or something like that, and you'd be working on one, and I'd then come and ask questions while you were busily trying to get one ready. And the reason for that was because, I have a few trombone pieces where you actually need to use bassoon reeds, and what I was actually trying to do was to get David to make me some reeds, and it worked. So I think I've still got some of your reeds lying around here now, although they might be a little bit dried out right now. Now, the reason that I was so interested in that, though, was because back then, and still is because the bassoon, I think, is my favorite woodwind instrument. Sorry, guys, but it really is, because the amount, the sound and the color and the expression there means something to me. Maybe it's because I'm from the north and we like sort of sadness. I don't know. Maybe it is something like that. But the bassoon is definitely capable of doing many other things than that. And you as a player, I find, as someone who is able to color what the bassoon does like in a very extreme way. It seems like an extremely complicated and stupidly designed instrument that sends one down a very narrow way, and you have to work very hard at it to make it speak in many different ways. And I think it's the one instrument in sort of in the back of the orchestra, between the brass and between the wind. It's all the other instruments. I think it's very hard for us to step away from playing in a sort of a stereotypical way, you know, the trumpets and trombones, loud and brash and perfect and strong and all the time. But the bassoon, partly because of what the instrument is, but also how composers have written for it, has a lot more color. So, do you agree?
I'm actually really impressed with what you've just said there. I couldn't describe the bassoon better. I mean, I think you and I share something, Dávur, that we're obsessed with sound and kind of how sound is made, you know, is that kind of, and when you talk about reeds, that's it, you know, kind of, I mean, I don't just make a reed. I had a fascinating conversation with Lewis, our second bassoon, when he was on trial with the orchestra. Lewis is crazy about reed making, for example, and he knows everything about it and all the technique side. And my reed making has always come from sort of intuition and observance, trial and testing. You know, so for me, for example, when I lived in Spain, before I came to this orchestra, I used to carry around a junior hacksaw in the car, and I would drive around. Whenever I saw an interesting bit of cane, I would stop the car and cut a piece of cane, put it in the car, and to make a reed later.
Wow.
I know it sounds really impressive. The one thing I always forgot to do was label it. So I had all these different samples, and I would make some fantastic reeds and some terrible reeds, but you know, didn't know where they were from. But what was fascinating for me was like kind of it was the fact that the cane is in itself is a very unstable plant, in the sense it grows rapidly, really quickly. You know, kind of in the height of the summer, it can grow a couple of inches a day. And so, and it starts off like a leek, literally like a leek. You can peel the layers off, and it hardens with the sun, etc., etc. And you know, so we've done lots of experiments of wigwams, of cutting canes and making wigwams, trying to mature cane on a windowsill in Scotland, which doesn't work, by the way. and that coupled to the bassoon, the mysterious thing, or the thing about the bassoon is no one really understands how it works, right? The bassoon is an instrument that's sort of almost developed by accident. So the very fact that a couple of years ago, 10 years ago now, when I picked up my bassoon from the Heckel factory, Heckel being the flagship model of the bassoon. And I remember, and I was given a top tip, which was to take over a fine malt, because Ralph, who's the managing director that likes his whiskey. So we had a couple of tipples, and then they're very worried about a kind of industrial espionage. But after a couple of glasses of whiskey, he kind of eased up a bit and relaxed a bit, and actually left me in the safe where all the bassoons were being made. There are about 50 bassoons in there, which in all in different stages and things. And they've got 3 or 4 master makers, and the fascinating thing is all the bassoons, even now, they're all slightly different sizes. They're slightly taller, slightly shorter. The tone holes are bored in at a slightly different angle. They're slightly wider or they're narrower, but they all come up with a sort of similar sound. And no one quite understands why. And it's like kind of, and when they tried to put the keywork on a bassoon to actually bore the holes directly into the bore, so rather than an angle, but they actually kind of went in directly into the bore, it didn't sound like a bassoon anymore. Which is, and if you couple to that the contrabassoon is made exactly like that, but still sounds like an extension of the bassoon, it's something I don't really understand at all, the physics of it. But going back to what you said, is like, my thing about bassoon playing is, don't think of the fact that you're playing a bassoon. Don't always look through everything. It's like, or I'm playing this complicated instrument with too many keys on it, and you know, I think Chris said the other day, you know, the great thing about bassoon is when it goes wrong, it's very, very funny, you know, and which is true, you know, it's like, and it's so, you know, if you get hung up on all the actual physical limitations and difficulties of the instrument, then I think that it can, then you stop making music in a way, and actually just think about and actually just feel music much more, and just like kind of try and convey what emotion or what feeling you want to get across. What, you know, don't be obsessed with beautiful sound, like kind of be obsessed with, you know, beauty, for example. Pretty and beautiful. If something's pretty, aesthetically it's very pleasing, but it maybe doesn't have much depth to it. But if something's beautiful, it's usually because maybe if you're talking about a face, or a human face, for example, it might be because one of the features is kind of slightly bigger. They have a bigger mouth, or very white teeth, or and sound is the same, you know. So kind of what you want to do is to convey a message, and think of it as a language, and that's my philosophy. That's how I go about it. So it's just kind of, so, and I don't ever like to play anything the same way. You know, everything's always different. And I spend the week in the rehearsals if I've got a solo, to try and not let the orchestra know how I'm going to play the solo. So they have to actually really listen hard to me. So that, you know,
well, that's probably exactly that I'm picking up on you, because it really makes me listen, because it is, you know, it does change, and change grow, and that's definitely something I try and do myself as well. And you mentioned something funny, like it's I wonder how it is for non-musicians to listen to us musicians talk about our own instrument. It must all sound the same, and because we all love our instruments so much. But in the interviews that we did, something funny happened. Like in your long interview, David, you said that some people say that the bassoon is the instrument that's more like the human voice. Then I heard in Adrian's short interview him saying that the oboe is literally the same as the human voice. And Katherine also said that the flute is the closest instrument to the human voice. So we have a little bit of a problem here. So I think it's time for our next poll. So if we could throw up the next poll here, and we can ask our audience to decide this once and for all for us here. So if you do a little vote.
Does the trumpet not even get a look in?
We're coming to that later. We're coming to that later. So if everyone does their vote and submits it, we should get, this is going to be very interesting. And we will be talking about this in the T-bar next time for sure. We can have arguments. I'm looking forward to this result. David, you have also been very active behind the scenes of the orchestra since you joined. You have been on the RSNO board of player directors for quite a while. Oh, here we go. Here's the result. Yes, David, congratulations. We win. Cool. Fantastic. That's a good result to get there. So, yes.
Adrian and I didn't get a chance to actually campaign, though.
Okay. Sorry. Too late. We win. Yeah. David, you've been on the RSNO board of player directors for quite a while, for a lot of the time that I've been in the orchestra. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit about that, and so people understand another role that musicians do other than playing on the platform.
For me, the fascinating thing about our orchestra is that, you know, so first of all, you've got kind of two basic different types of orchestras and how they're managed. You've got a managed orchestra, which is under a management structure from top to bottom. And then you've got a self-governing orchestra, which is almost the opposite way around. So I kind of, if you kind of wanted to envisage it, a managed orchestra would be like a triangle. And then a self-governing orchestra would be like an inverted triangle, a triangle actually upside down. And what you get, of course, is a star, right? Which is like, and I kind of think that, in a sense, that we've got the best of both worlds. That's exactly it, you know. So that we as player directors, that there is you have a very important say in the future of the orchestra, the strategy of the orchestra. You buy into it. You know, it's one of the reasons I think that the RSNO is so successful as a family. It's a bit like, if you would compare it to John Lewis, for example, you know, where all the employees are also, you know, the shareholders. It's like kind of we buy into our product. We're part of the product, and I think that's why it becomes so important. And that's, you know, as a player director, you can obviously bring a very specific role to it in terms of as a musician. Musicians come, as we've already discovered on this panel, we come from all different walks of life. We've come from very different backgrounds. We have very different interests, but we're all obsessed with music and performing music. And, you know, equally, we're not usually great at kind of perhaps long-term strategy or kind of administration, or thinking about actually how to reach out as an organization, which is obviously where the directors come in very important, and actually right across Scotland you have figureheads in their own field who come and support the orchestra, but they don't have the insight that we would have as within the orchestra. I remember a question once being, and so there's a great deal of transparency in the process, which I think is fantastic, where accountability and transparency. So giving you an example, I remember several years ago being asked on a board meeting about why it was taking so long to appoint a principal clarinet, and I think it only took us about 5 years, so it wasn't that bad. But we said, you know, the reason is, and Katherine was saying about, you know, we kind of, you know, the way we kind of pass perhaps a solo onto each other by moving and stuff, but it's also, I think we become, as a team, we become so close to synonymous that we can actually, it's almost like we can finish each other's sentences. You know, one of us will start something and someone else will finish the sentence. And of course, that's what music making is. And it's the ability to actually communicate with each other and be on a similar level is incredibly important. It's a much harder skill than we actually give it credit for. You know, it's like kind of, it's not just about playing your instrument. Being a member of the orchestra, it goes far beyond just actually being able to be skilled as a player. You know, actually, it's your ability to communicate. So, and that's what you would deliver to the board. I think is that almost obsession. I mean, each one of us in turn is almost taught in almost an obsessive way, right? And it's this because we're obsessed with detail, and we're obsessed with trying to be as perfect as we can be, because we're delivering a product which people have to enjoy, right? So
and that's definitely something that surprised me when I joined an orchestra as well, because maybe I was told before I joined, but I didn't realize how much the job actually entails. And like when you audition for an orchestra, they don't ask you about your education skills or about your directorship experience or anything like that. But in the RSNO, that's you know, again, doesn't happen in every orchestra, but something that musicians have to have, and the musicians develop in the organization here as well. So yeah. Thank you, David. We are quickly running out of time. It's all my fault. It's going way slower than I promised my colleagues it was going to go. It's now Chris's turn. Now, I asked Chris if the trumpet sounds like the human voice, and he said no, it is the voice of God. So that's where we have a problem, because the voice of God is obviously the trombone, my instrument. So we're going to have a quick poll. I promise this is the last one. This one will be very interesting. This will make the discussions between me and Chris Hart in the future much shorter, actually, because we'll just know the answer to this.
I'd just like to clarify what I actually said was that it heralds God.
Heralds? No, you definitely said the voice of God. So you agree it's not the voice of God?
No, it heralds God, isn't it?
Heralds God, right. Let's see what the audience thinks after everyone has voted and submitted this. I'm looking forward to this.
It's going to be the trombone.
I'm very excited. I'm very excited. Just to make sure that we don't have to argue about this again in the future. Well, here we go. No, no. You are all wrong. That's terrible.
Thank you.
That's absolutely terrible. Oh,
I'd like to thank my parents and my family and everyone who brought me to this point in life.
You have ruined the rest of my career in the orchestra. I'll be hearing about this forever. So anyway, after that's sorted, let's talk a little bit more serious. Chris is someone who came
Sorry.
to the orchestra after me, and I'm very lucky because I feel like I have the best seat in the house, sitting right next to that sound, where that comes from. And he's a person who I admire his process. He's got a very sort of simple on the surface, but very sophisticated process of of producing music. But I'm curious, actually. I haven't actually asked him this before, but I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that, how that process has developed from joining the orchestra and now how many years later? Five?
Yeah, 4.5.
4.5, yeah.
I think I've always been very, very, very critical of my own playing, the same as everyone else probably is. But like, to give you some sort of context, my mum now still has a folder of music from when I was 10 and 11 that I was never going to be able to play. And it was sort of second cornet parts in brass band marches. So yeah, there's a whole list of stuff that in my head I told myself I was never going to be able to play because it was too hard and I was terrible and it was all dreadful. And that carried over actually into starting the orchestra, because you sit there and you go, right, well, first of all, getting an orchestral job doesn't happen to me, it happens to other people. You have friends that get jobs and you see people that get jobs, in other orchestras, and you go, oh, that's amazing, they must be great. But I never really thought it would happen to me. So then you sit there and you go, oh, right, okay, so these people, so Dave and Katherine and Adrian and Dávur, and basically there's a vote when there's open jobs and people vote for who they want. So you think, well, a certain number of people must have liked my playing, so I'm here on merit, so I can do it. But actually telling yourself you can do it and believing that you can do it are two very different things for me. So that's been my battle since I started, where you sit there and you go, right, I still have relatively little experience in orchestras. Like I didn't come up through the youth orchestra route like well, a few brass players, maybe not so much trumpet players. I came up through brass bands, so we would do arrangements of things like Russell and Ludmilla Overture for brass bands. And then you come into the orchestra and the orchestra's playing, you're going, what's this orchestral arrangement of the brass band original? That doesn't work. Little things like that, but you sit there and you go, right, so I'm playing this piece for the first time. Everyone else around me has played this before, so they know how it goes. And it's not just like you can listen to it and you can prepare yourself and you can practice the part, but until you've sat there and performed it with your colleagues, you still don't really know kind of how it goes. And then you do it and then you're like, oh, well, I played that one, and then you tick and I've done that one. And that was kind of my life for the first 2.5, 3 years of the orchestra, just this constant barrage of new repertoire and new styles that most people around me had played a lot before. And I thought, oh, Jesus, I'm going to be shown up at some point and it's all going to fall down and they're going to see through me and it's all terrible. It hasn't happened yet, so fingers crossed. But yeah, and then I think like I was quite lucky. There's a few jobs been up elsewhere, and I've been lucky that I've been going down to different places and getting a little bit more experience with different just different sections and different conductors and different string sections and different wind sections, and you can always bring that experience. I think like Katherine was saying, she's had a lot of experience, meeting other soloists and going and doing solo concerts and meeting conductors, and having that chance to build up a rapport with a different set of musicians stands you in very good stead when you come back to your own, like your home base, because you're more comfortable and you feel, I certainly feel like I can bring those musical experiences back to the SNO, and it hopefully makes me a better player. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. It's sort of a parallel, but I feel the same. The process that you have in the head in the beginning when you join the orchestra, you don't feel like you actually know anything. But I can tell you from 10 years further down the road, I still don't feel like I really know anything. So that doesn't change.
Oh, that's good. That's very comforting. Thank you.
Good. I found was that when you look backwards and you see lots of changes, you see lots of like development and moving and all that, but you always think that you've reached some sort of level, which is like here's the place, this is a place, and yeah. You look forward and it looks like a straight road.
Yeah,
and
I am.
Yeah,
this is where I need to be, and here I shall stay for the next 20 years. It
just isn't like that. It doesn't, and it's actually a very good thing that it doesn't stay like that.
And
so.
it was interesting. We had a little question on the Q&A that, sorry, I was zoned out for a minute while I was answering it, but from, where are we? Hang on, let me find it. From Joe Robertson, just asking about beginner, like being a beginner, and do you learn muscle memory and does it kind of stick? And sometimes it does, but even now, I still, actually the last year has been great for having the time to go, right, what are the problems that I feel I have in my own playing, and what do I need to do methodically to iron those little, large, whatever they are, creases out of my playing. And I think that probably applies to, well, everyone really, all the musicians in the orchestra. At points you'll feel like, oh, I've lost my ability to play quietly, or when I'm playing loud it feels like I'm shouting rather than playing a nice open sound, or there's all these little aspects that are all built from the tiny little blocks at the bottom, and if one of them slips out of place, then all the things at the top that you're talking about, your musical aspects, you suddenly lose the control over that because of something small at the bottom that's dropped out. Does that make sense? So that's kind of how I think about it. But
it's basically one small step at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you, Chris. That's a very interesting insight there. But with you being the baby here, the sort of the newest one, you certainly haven't been shy with taking on responsibilities, because as well as being principal trumpet, you're also a member of the players committee, which I also wonder if people know if that exists. So could you very quickly explain what that one does?
Okay, so the players committee is basically responsible for the kind of the day-to-day little things that might, because the management have a lot to do and occasionally things slip through the net. So if we have a schedule sent in advance and they say, oh, there might be too many hours in the week, or they've put the wrong train on the schedule, or sometimes it's organized, just basically the day-to-day organizing of the orchestra that somebody in the management might have missed. That's kind of the general job, I think.
Interesting. So it sounds like you're training to be a manager.
Yeah, I suppose we're all kind of managing all the time, I suppose. But yeah, it's more kind of it's kind of the boring detail under the surface that if it gets forgotten about, things start to go wrong. So it's very important that people are quite hot on the little details.
Absolutely. I would second that. I've been on the players committee myself, and it's probably the one that meets the most and does actually the most important thing, even if sometimes it might seem a little bit boring, but yeah. Anyway, thank you very much for all our 4 principals. It's been fantastic to get some insights here. I watched all your videos, and if our audience here hasn't seen all of them, you really should. There's quite a lot of material that these people have put out, a concerto, a long interview, and a beginner's guide for all the instruments. And I mean, I was overwhelmed, and especially, I mean, I get to hear you guys all the time, but I don't get to hear you play concertos, so it was fantastic to hear that. And the long interviews that you did with Peter Dykes. Even if they're very instrument specific, I found them fascinating. So I'm sure our audience will find them fascinating too. And they can all be found on our RSNO YouTube channel. Right, I think it's time to open up for questions. We've had a few sent in already that people have been answering as well. But we had ones also sent in before this Chatinée started, and there was one very interesting one there. We have a question from Jenny Beatty, who wants to ask all the principals here, if you didn't become a musician, what would you be doing instead? Katherine.
Well, interesting. I mentioned acting, obviously, and being a sort of, I did love doing drama when I was younger. But I have got a bit of a side business. So I design jewelry. And so I've got an Etsy, so if anyone's interested, you can find the Drum and Craft Company on Etsy. So I'm actually modeling a pair here.
Wow.
So I love doing that. And I make bits and pieces and candles and things. It's just kind of, especially during lockdown, it's kind of kept me sane. But so I'm kind of considering branching out as a jewelry designer. So if you don't see me in the RSNO in a few years' time, you'll know that that's become a full-time job. Very unlikely. There's only so many earrings, you know, a girl can have.
I had no idea. Is this something you've been doing for a long time, or?
Well, more recently, I've kind of done it in a view to actually other people buying them from me, because it was just because I've had more time recently to do it. And then that's, you know, the beauty of lockdown, I suppose. You suddenly, you know, you think about your time in a different way. I mean, I also have a 2-year-old, and Dave and Adrian know that your life really isn't your own when you have a little person running around, and I only have one, they have more. But it's kind of just something other than a child and music. I think it's really important to have something that keeps you sane and just gives you a different focus. And
you already have a second career.
Yeah, well, it's funny though, like the jewelry thing, you know, Dave was saying earlier about like how it's just this endless, you know, we don't ever get really a finished product as musicians, you know, we're constantly sort of striving. So if I make a pair of earrings, like I finished something and I can see it in front of me, you know, that's so unusual. We just don't really get that as musicians, because every performance you're kind of like building on for the next time or whatever. So it's kind of quite nice to actually just make something and it's there, done. So that's quite satisfying. Anyway, sorry, I'll stop talking.
No, that's fascinating. I should give it a go. David, how about you?
I'm almost the opposite. I was like kind of, I remember when I was back at school and we had to fill in a careers kind of form, what we were going to do. And I had no idea what I was going to do. But so I kind of knew I was interested in music. I think it almost found me, but I do remember filling in my form and it came up as air traffic controller as an option number 1. And I laugh at me understand how that happened. Maybe I should have gone down that route. I don't know. No, I think there's many times I thought about would I do something else, but just actually in the end, I think I'm pretty good at playing the bassoon, or at least I've managed to make a living out of it. I can't imagine myself doing anything else. If it wasn't playing the bassoon, it would be stacking tins in the supermarket, or you know, perhaps when we're driving back down from Aberdeen down the A9, I think, I could be one of those guys in the middle of the road repairing the road this time of night as we're driving back. I think I'll stick to playing the bassoon in the orchestra. It's a much better job.
It sounds like you've considered many different career options. If it doesn't work, Adrian, how about you?
I think like Dave, I sort of feel like I do the job that I really love doing, and I can't quite imagine doing anything else. But that being said, I guess, okay, well, for the sake of an answer, I would get into the wine business, I think, in terms of recommending bottles of wine that perhaps people don't know that much about, you know, at various price points. And I think there's a you know, people are always asking me for hot tips on what wine they should be buying. So I'd probably go down that route.
I'll be your first customer. That's
yeah.
Sure. And how about you, Chris? Chris, I'm afraid you're muted. If you could.
Sorry, I was answering a question. My apologies. What would I do if I wasn't in the orchestra? I kind of like doing things with my hands. So like I like working with wood, that kind of stuff. And I'm also quite interested in things like psychology. So that I'm always interested in how people's mental state affects how they play, certainly. And there's a lot of musicians that I know who I think probably hold themselves back, not necessarily in the orchestra, but like from when I was studying, certainly certain aspects of their playing was being held back by the way they thought about things. So I would be quite interested to delve a bit deeper into that, but I don't know how you would translate that into earning any money rather than just sitting and it being a hobby. But I think that's the kind of psychological impact of your mind on how you do your everyday life and job and things. I find that really interesting. So
can I just touch on what Chris said about manufacturing stuff from wood? I mean, obviously the reed making that Dave and I have to sort of do on a day-to-day basis is pretty similar on those lines, and so I suppose actually maybe just making something physical that is, you know, I mean, the great thing about making a reed is it has an immediate use because you actually need it to do your job. So there's kind of, you know.
I also forgot to say, if anyone comes across any railings with bits missing out of them in Glasgow, I also do what Dave does, and I collect bits of metal to turn into mouthpieces to see if it makes any difference.
It's you.
Brilliant.
Right. I suppose I should answer it as well, because yeah, I mean, I was probably heading in different routes before I went to music college, and I felt like I was really taking a big chance. And I told myself that if it didn't look like I was gonna go anywhere by the end of college, I would change immediately, and that would probably be either to something science, engineering, something like that. But now, later, I think actually I probably like working with people more than I thought back then. So actually working in tourism or something like that is something I think I would like to do as well. So hope that was informative for everyone. We have another very interesting question from Moira Haywood. She's wondering if you have any tips to deal with nerves when you're performing. I'm going to start. My very first, the best tip I have is yogic breathing. Slow down your breathing. You being excited about playing is absolutely natural, but if it goes over the top is when you get these butterflies. If you feel butterflies and shaking, the only thing you need to do is to really slow down, and the best way to do it is to breathe in just through one nostril, as slow as you can. In all the way, out to the other one. Do that 3 times. Butterflies have disappeared, but you're still really excited and geared up to play. Chris?
So I have a very similar technique to that. It's quite difficult to do this when you're sat on stage, if you're nervous before a solo. But no, normally what I do is, if there's, normally it's something slow and high and quiet that gives me the jitters. So you sit there and there's normally something happening in the movement beforehand that you can breathe with the music. So if you have something that's in a slow 4, for example, you breathe in, and you have to control your breathing so that you breathe in for 4 and out for 4. You do that for a few bars before you're going to play, and then you're sort of breathing with the music, and you've taken everything right back down to a bass level and go, right, it's fine. And also there's there's a fantastic trumpet player called Alan Vizzuti that, if anyone's a trumpet player on here, they will have heard of him. And he was saying, don't automatically assume that nerves are a bad thing. Like you're taught from a very young age when you play music that you're like, don't be nervous. It's fine. Don't be nervous. You don't have to be nervous. So that when you are nervous, you go, oh, I'm nervous. Oh, okay, right. Now I'm nervous. What do I do? And he said the best way to do it is to just observe it. So if you sit there and you put a bit of pressure on yourself, like record it with your phone or with an iPad or whatever you have, and put that extra level of pressure, so you feel a little bit of something building, and you go, right, what does that feel like? How does it affect me? You know, like for Dávur, it might be breathing. For me, it might be that I get tense across my shoulders, or I might sort of want to get really stuck into it, so I try and play a bit too loud. So if you start to get nervous, don't automatically assume that that's going to negatively impact you. Like really almost try and watch it from afar and see the impact it has on you, because the more you learn about what it does to you, the more you can learn about how to counteract it.
David?
I'll jump in there as well, yeah, because this is something that's always fascinated me, particularly since when I was younger. I used to suffer from nerves quite a lot. And for me, and it's an extension of what both you and Dávur and Chris have said, it's first of all, nerves come usually, I think first of all, nerves are very, very important, and we need them. But the fear element of nerves comes from fear of the unknown, that kind of like a nightmare, which really means about not being in control, right? It's when we're fearful, it's when a situation begins to control us rather than we're in control of the situation. And so that for me is the key to it, is to really understand your situation, and like kind of, so breathing is obviously one of them, physical stature, how you feel in the room, really understand what it is you're going to do. So you know, like when you're making a sound, well, actually, how do you make the sound? You know, kind of how much pressure do you need for that note? What happens beforehand? What happens afterwards? How would you react if that didn't go right? And the other thing about it is that we don't read things in a linear fashion, because if you read your music in a linear fashion, each note by note, and a note goes wrong, and then the next note you play is dependent upon the note you've just played. So if you've missed it, or if it's sharp, or it's flat, or late, or too loud, or too quiet, and then your next judgment call on the next note is based on that, then that's also going to be wrong, you know? So actually just be able to kind of dive in and dive out, and understand at any given moment what it is you need to do for something, The great thing about that is time then slows down to actually create time for yourself. So with my students, for example, I fill their heads with information when they're going to go and perform. I actually cram their heads full of information. So there's so much to think about that they don't have a chance to be nervous, because they've got to think so much about what, and actually think about what you do, you know, because I think we're terrible at that as musicians. We just pick up an instrument, just not really necessarily thinking about what we're doing, you know. If you ask anyone that's played a musical instrument, have they perhaps watched a TV screen or listened to something whilst they're practicing at some point? They're all going to say yes if they're honest, you know. But why would we do that? Do you know what I mean? It's like kind of so. Yeah, that's my answer to it.
Interesting, Adrian.
Yeah, just to add two things that I've found that over the years have helped me is that first of all, I find that the moments where I usually find myself nervous, it's because I'm in a situation that I feel that I'm unfamiliar with. And so one of the things that I do, especially actually when I'm, say, doing a solo spot or you know, perhaps playing in a different position in a hall or in a venue that I don't know, is to actually have pre-visualized the situation in my head, so that when it actually comes to doing it, it feels like it's not the first time, and that even sometimes that it feels like if I imagine that the concert's happened and I wasn't happy with it, it then feels like I've given myself a free second chance to fix whatever I perceived had gone wrong. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, I think for me anyway, I find that when things do go wrong, it's largely because I've been worried about something that's been a technical issue. And I tense up because I know something in my head is difficult. And actually, I find that thinking more about just going with the flow of the music always gives myself the best chance to actually just do it and not worry and not think too much about this difficult thing I'm about to do. Because by and large, I think we tend to create our own fears and create our own issues with what we do. And I think sometimes just remembering that what our role is and how it fits into this greater and better, you know, whole, I think for me, that's really helped. So
that is very interesting, because I have a very similar one, which we can test out your theory on our audience right now. Because if I ask everyone to don't think of a pink elephant, what are you all thinking about? That's the same thing. If you keep don't do this, it's going to happen. So that's a very good one, Adrian. Thank you.
I'll just add one word, literally one word: bananas.
I'm afraid you're going to have to explain a little bit more.
I always eat bananas if I'm nervous before I play. It's my kind of, if I've, you know, solo stuff particularly, I usually have 2 or 3 bananas before I go on.
Really?
Yeah.
I had no. How? Why? Is it a psychological thing, or is it?
Yeah, I think it might be potassium. Somebody will know more about this than me, but and it may be psychological now with me also. But people eat them when they can't sleep as well. Bananas are supposed to be good. Chris, do you know more about this than me?
No. Does it not make your teeth feel really furry? Because if I did that, I'd be like.
I think I'm just so used to, you know, I can't kind of not have one now before I do a concert. I don't know if it helps. I don't know if it helps, but why not, you know? Try it.
There's a few things that I definitely need to try here, that's for sure. But one thing to add from me though as well is that I think that, you know, if you're not nervous, then if I'm not nervous, I'm normally actually a little bit bored. So I want to be nervous. And I think actually what we often do, we're good at probably making ourselves nervous sometimes when we aren't. To kind of it's kind of connected.
It's performers, what's the phrase now? Something like performers that don't get nervous are either not performers or liars or something. I mean, like everybody, you know, it's you know, everybody does, I think, just to different extents.
The one that I heard like that was if somebody tells you they're not nervous before they play, they're either stupid or lying.
Yeah.
That was
I think-
It shows you care about what you're doing.
Yeah, I was going to say that it does show that you really care about what you're doing, and also I think adrenaline is a good thing. I mean, I think if we all think about the sort of the best concerts that we've done, quite often there is an atmosphere there that makes you feel more self-aware, and you know, they can often be the big occasions. You know, whether it's a great program or a good conductor or a full packed concert hall or whatever, it sort of that creates its own adrenaline in you, and that really it can take everyone's playing to another level. So
I'd add to that, adrenaline it's nature's super drug. You know, it's what makes you run faster. It's a fight or flight mechanism. So it's an enhancement. If you use it correctly, it's understanding your nerves, then it can enhance your performance.
Is that our performance enhancing drug?
Absolutely.
well, that and bananas. Yeah.
Fantastic question, because we it seems we have a lot to say about that. So it's obvious that for everyone listening, that nerves is not something that professionals don't have. Like you kind of have to have them to become a musician. it turns out. Right, we've already gone over when I promised these guys that we would finish, but there is one last question which has been sent in before, which is a very interesting one. We are all getting used to social distancing. For performing musicians, it must present a particular challenge. Are there any pieces you would not attempt given 2 meter spacing? And then any pieces where it might be an advantage? Anyone?
I think we'd probably attempt anything now. I feel like after the last sort of bit of, we have played some tricky things, distance, and everything's different for different reasons, But a lot of us, I think, are getting used to. I mean, like, I think I was speaking to Tim, our principal clarinet, and he's like, I'm not sure I want anyone in my zone now. I'm so having my space, So I don't think there's anything that I wouldn't want to attempt. I don't know. I don't know about making it easier. I think a lot of it for me is mindset. I think if you think too much about the fact that you're really distanced, then you start kind of second guessing everything. And actually, if you just kind of play instinctively as you always would, it's okay. I mean, I don't like the physical distance from the front in terms of, eye line. That's what, I don't like, but you guys have that much more, Dávur and Chris, than we do anyway, because you're further back. But, if I can't see like the whites of the conductor's eyes, I get a bit kind of, I like to be able to see that. But orally, I think we're coping pretty well, actually, I think.
I think it's very interesting that the biggest project that we've done so far, we recorded a few weeks ago. I think it goes out in 3 weeks, which is Nicola Benedetti playing Szymanowski Violin Concerto and a piece by Anton Weinberg and a piece by Panufnik, and they all, it's the most spread out we've been by quite a long way. So for those of you that know the Glasgow Royal Concert Hall, Thomas Sondergaard, as you'll see on the video when it comes out, was stood about 2/3 of the way back in the stalls, I think. So they've taken as many of the stall seats out as they can. And he was stood there, and Dávur and myself and Rata John on the tuba, we were stood on the back wall of the choir stalls. So if you sent Thomas Sondergaard and Dávur a letter, they would have had different addresses, I think, just about. So I mean, that's kind of the extreme that we've had. I mean, the concerts we've done in the auditorium in our own home, I mean, it was a bit of a shock the first week we came in and we were so far away. But I think that we always adjust. We're always sitting in slightly different places anyway, depending on the repertoire. Certainly we move around a lot. We sit by the horns, we sit further down, sometimes next to the cor anglais if we're doing small repertoire where there's just 2 trumpets and timps. So you just kind of get used to it, I think. But I much prefer being sat close together, but we'll see how long that'll take.
I would say that basically I was hoping for that answer as well, because people will be able to see, and I think this is the first concert that goes on in the new spring season of the RSNO. I mean, yeah, it did take getting used to. We had to do more than one take. Let's put it that way. But it did come together. And like what Katherine says, it if you think about it as a problem, then it becomes a problem. So, 100%.
just, yeah, I found that there's had to be a lot more trust in terms of, I think the things that I find more difficult is that getting a sense of balance between instruments is much harder because you've got much wider gaps. And also, as Katherine alluded to, that sense of sort of being able to sort of move a phrase together. It's much harder to sort of keep that peripheral vision when you're much further spaced out. But I would say that the one positive that I've come out of it is that I find that it's much easier to hear yourself, which is sometimes something which, you know, we take for granted, that sometimes, you know, especially in sort of louder music, you actually feeling where you sit within a big chord or something is not always easy. But, you know, sometimes I now look, when I'm watching a concert on YouTube or something that was recorded years ago, I look at it, I think, my goodness, they're so close together, all those people. It just looks so strange now. So I think it's going to be really interesting going back when we finally do, to reconnecting and finding out how our job feels different again.
We've had a lot fewer complaints about the amount of noise that we're making, which can only be a good thing.
Yeah. And I would say for especially that week that we did with Panufnik as well, what was cool was for us brass was that we were sitting up to the choir stalls and we were actually experiencing the acoustics of the concert hall. On the concert hall, in the concert hall in Glasgow is particular in that way. It's very clear. You hear what's going on, but on stage you feel no acoustic, and up there you can feel that it's actually a really nice acoustic in that hall. So, hello, Torben. Torben has joined us. That probably means Torben appearing probably means that it's about time to end. I would say that's probably a sign. I would like to thank my fellow principals for answering all these questions. I'm sorry for going a little bit over. Thanks for everyone who sent in questions, and thanks everyone for answering on the Q&A. So we got them all answered there, I think. And I have to mention them again, the chair sponsors who have been absolutely brilliant, not just always, but is particularly during a lockdown. And yeah, without you guys, yeah, it definitely wouldn't work. So you deserve to have this dedicated to you, and we hope to be able to dedicate more concerts like this to you in the future. So make sure you go and watch the concertos, long interview and short interview by all these principals. And also we look forward to seeing you all in the spring season, which launches very soon. I should have that date. I don't have it on my screen, but I'm sure most of the people listening probably actually know that better than me. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thank you, Dávur. Thank you.
Thank you.